When Marcus Reed and his gang cornered 16-year-old Aaliyah Brooks in the third-floor bathroom at Jefferson High, they thought they were teaching just another new student her place. What they didn't know was that beneath Aaliyah's quiet composure lay years of tactical training from her Navy SEAL father. They expected tears and submission. Instead, they awakened to something far more dangerous than they could imagine. Marcus thought he was dealing with an easy target, but he was about to learn what happens when privileged bullies make the fatal mistake of underestimating a warrior's daughter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jefferson High's courtyard. As students filtered through the main entrance, backpacks slung over shoulders and conversations buzzing about weekend plans, Aaliyah Brooks walked quietly among them, her headphones blocking out the noise while she mentally prepared for another day at her new school. 3 weeks had passed since her family moved to Millbrook, Connecticut, and she was still adjusting to the preppy atmosphere of one of the state's most prestigious public schools. Her father, Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Brooks, had been reassigned to the Naval Submarine Base in nearby Groton after 22 years of active duty. The move meant leaving behind friends in San Diego, but Aaliyah understood the demands of military life. At 16, she'd already lived in 7 different states and had learned to adapt quickly to new environments. Jefferson High was different from her previous schools. The building itself looked more like a private academy with its red brick facade and manicured grounds. The student body was predominantly white and wealthy, driving luxury cars their parents had bought for their 16th birthdays. Aaliyah's modest Honda Civic, purchased with money from her summer job, stood out in the parking lot filled with BMWs and Mercedes. In her first period advanced chemistry class, Aaliyah took her usual seat near the window. She excelled academically, maintaining a 4.0 GPA that had already caught the attention of college recruiters. Her goal was Stanford's engineering program, following in the footsteps of her older brother, who was currently serving as a Marine Corps officer. "Today we'll be selecting lab partners for our semester project," announced Mrs. Henderson, a stern woman in her 50s who commanded respect through her expertise rather than volume. The project would count for 30% of their final grade, making partner selection crucial. As students began pairing off, Aaliyah found herself approached by Emma Sullivan, a quiet girl with auburn hair who sat 2 rows behind her. "Want to be partners?" Emma asked nervously. "I've seen your work, and you're really good at this stuff." "Sure," Aaliyah smiled, grateful that someone had made the first move. Emma seemed genuine, unlike some of the other students who either ignored her completely or offered fake pleasantries. Their conversation was interrupted by loud laughter from the back corner of the classroom. Marcus Reed, a senior linebacker on the football team, was holding court with his usual crowd. Tall and broad-shouldered with perfectly styled blonde hair, Marcus commanded attention wherever he went. His father owned the largest construction company in the county, and the Reed family had been prominent in Millbrook for 3 generations. Flanking Marcus were his closest friends, Connor Walsh, whose family had made millions in real estate development, and Ryan Mitchell, the mayor's son who served as student body president, despite his obvious lack of interest in actual leadership. Together, they formed the unofficial ruling class of Jefferson High, their wealth and family connections making them virtually untouchable. "Check out the new girl," Marcus said, his voice carrying just loud enough for Aaliyah to hear. "Think she knows how things work around here yet?" Connor smirked, adjusting his expensive watch. "Probably thinks she can just waltz in and act like she belongs. My dad says her family's renting that little house on Oak Street. Military, right?" "Yeah, some Navy guy," Ryan added, pulling information from sources Aaliyah couldn't imagine. "Dad mentioned it at dinner. Says they're only here temporarily until he gets his next assignment." Emma shifted uncomfortably beside Aaliyah, clearly aware of the conversation happening behind them. "Just ignore them," she whispered. "They do this to everyone who doesn't fit their idea of what Jefferson students should look like." Mrs. Henderson's sharp voice cut through the room. "Mr. Reed, since you seem more interested in socializing than chemistry, perhaps you'd like to explain the difference between ionic and covalent bonding to the class?" Marcus straightened up, his confident smile faltering slightly. Ionic bonds are when electrons transfer between atoms, and covalent bonds share electrons." "Partially correct but oversimplified," Mrs. Henderson replied curtly. "Miss Brooks, would you care to elaborate?" Aaliyah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She could have given a simple answer and avoided attention, but her father had taught her never to diminish her intelligence to make others comfortable. Ionic bonds form between metals and nonmetals through complete electron transfer, creating charged ions held together by electrostatic forces. Covalent bonds occur between nonmetals sharing electron pairs, which can be polar or nonpolar depending on electronegativity differences. The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "Excellent. That's the level of understanding I expect from all my AP students." Behind her, Aaliyah heard Marcus mutter something under his breath. That made Connor and Ryan chuckle. The sound sent a chill down her spine, not from fear, but from recognition. She'd heard that same tone before at other schools, from other boys who thought intelligence was threatening when it came from someone who looked like her. The bell rang, ending the first period and sending students streaming into the hallways. Aaliyah gathered her books methodically, aware that Marcus and his friends were taking their time leaving the classroom. She'd learned to be conscious of her surroundings, a skill her father had taught her long before she understood why it was necessary. "Nice answer back there," Marcus said as she reached the doorway. His tone was friendly, but something cold lurked beneath the surface. "Really impressive stuff." "Thanks," Aaliyah replied evenly, not slowing her pace. "You know," Connor added, falling into step beside her, "Jefferson has high standards, academic and otherwise. Some people take time to adjust to our culture here." Ryan nodded sagely, his political instincts making him sound almost reasonable. "It's important that everyone understands how things work. Helps maintain the harmony. That makes Jefferson so special." Aaliyah stopped walking and turned to face the three boys directly. Students flowed around them in the hallway, but she noticed how other kids gave the group a wide berth. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" Marcus's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "Just being welcoming. Making sure you know that Jefferson values tradition, you know? Academic excellence, sure, but also understanding your place in the community." "My place?" Aaliyah's voice carried a warning edge that her father would have recognized. "Everyone has a role to play," Connor said smoothly. "Some people are leaders. Some are followers. Some belong in advanced classes, others might be more comfortable in standard track. It's all about finding where you fit." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Emma appeared at Aaliyah's side, her face pale but determined. "Come on, Aaliyah. We'll be late for the second period." As they walked away, Aaliyah heard Ryan's voice carry down the hallway. "Smart girl. Hopefully she's smart enough to take good advice." That afternoon, Aaliyah sat in the school library working on her chemistry assignment when she noticed Connor Walsh watching her from across the room. He wasn't reading or studying, just observing with the kind of casual arrogance that suggested he had every right to monitor her activities. When she looked up, he didn't look away. Instead, he smiled and gave a small wave as if they were friends. The pattern continued over the next few days. One of the three boys would always seem to be nearby, not directly threatening but making their presence known. In the cafeteria, Marcus would laugh loudly at jokes that weren't funny, his eyes finding Aaliyah's table. During passing periods, Ryan would position himself where she had to walk past him. offering polite greetings that felt more like warnings. The psychological pressure was subtle but constant. They were mapping her routine, learning her schedule, and making sure she knew they were watching. It was sophisticated intimidation, the kind that left no obvious evidence but created an atmosphere of unease. Friday afternoon brought the first direct confrontation. Aaliyah was leaving her AP history class when she found Connor waiting outside the door. The hallway was emptying as students headed home for the weekend, leaving them relatively alone. "Walk with me," Connor said, not quite making it a request. "I have somewhere to be," Aaliyah replied, adjusting her backpack strap. "This won't take long." His tone carried the confidence of someone accustomed to having his wishes treated as commands. Just a friendly conversation between classmates. Against her better judgment, Aaliyah found herself walking beside him toward the main entrance. Connor moved with practiced ease, steering their path toward a less crowded section of the building. "You're really smart," he began, his voice conversational. "Mrs. Henderson obviously likes you. Good grades, good answers, good work ethic. Impressive stuff. Is there a point to this?" Connor stopped walking, turning to face her with the kind of serious expression politicians used when delivering bad news. "The point is that intelligence can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how you use it. Smart people know when to speak up and when to stay quiet. They understand social dynamics." Social dynamics? Like understanding that some schools have established hierarchies, traditions that go back generations. Smart students figure out how to succeed within those systems rather than challenging them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Aaliyah felt her pulse quicken. "Are you threatening me?" Connor's expression shifted to one of mock concern. "Threatening? That's a strong word. I'm offering guidance. Help from someone who understands how Jefferson works. And if I don't want your help?" The friendly mask slipped slightly, revealing something harder underneath. "Then you might find Jefferson a very difficult place to succeed, socially, academically, personally. Small communities can be challenging for people who don't fit in." The warning was clear despite its diplomatic packaging. Aaliyah understood that this was her formal notice: conform to their expectations or face consequences. What Connor couldn't know was that her father had prepared her for exactly this moment. "I'll keep that in mind," she said calmly, then walked away without waiting for his response. That evening, Aaliyah sat across from her father at their kitchen table, picking at her dinner while weighing how much to tell him. Master Chief Brooks had spent 2 decades reading people and situations, and she knew he'd already noticed her distraction. "How are things at the new school?" he asked, his voice carrying the casual tone that meant he suspected there was more to discuss. "Fine," she replied automatically, then caught herself. Her father had taught her that communication was essential to survival, whether in combat zones or high school hallways. Actually, there might be some social complications. Daniel Brooks set down his fork and gave her his full attention. "What kind of complications?" Aaliyah described the week's events, watching her father's expression grow progressively more serious. When she finished, he was quiet for several long moments. "These boys are testing you," he said finally. "Seeing how you respond to pressure, looking for weaknesses. It's a classic intimidation pattern. What should I do?" "Document everything. Times, locations, witnesses. Keep your situational awareness high and trust your instincts." His expression grew harder. "And if they escalate beyond words, you remember what I've taught you about protecting yourself." "Dad, I don't want to cause problems with your new assignment." Daniel's smile was razor sharp. "Sweetheart, if 3 privileged boys think they can intimidate my daughter, they're about to learn that some problems are worth causing." As Aaliyah headed upstairs to work on homework, she didn't notice the black Range Rover that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the three figures inside, planning their next move. Monday would bring a new escalation, and Marcus Reed was already developing ideas that would test every lesson her father had ever taught her. Monday morning arrived with the crisp bite of October air and an undercurrent of tension that Aaliyah felt the moment she stepped into Jefferson High. Something had shifted over the weekend. The casual glances and whispered conversations that followed her through the hallways carried a different energy, more focused and deliberate. Her first indication of trouble came during second period English literature. Mrs. Patterson was discussing symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird when she posed a question about racial prejudice in the novel. Before Aaliyah could raise her hand, Marcus Reed's voice cut through the classroom. "Maybe we should ask our resident expert," he said with mock sincerity. "Aaliyah probably has some unique insights into this subject matter." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Patterson frowned, clearly sensing the inappropriate undertone, but uncertain how to address it without making the situation worse. Other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Aaliyah met Marcus's gaze directly. "The novel explores how prejudice stems from ignorance and fear," she said calmly. "Atticus Finch represents the moral courage required to stand against social pressure when you know something is wrong." "Interesting perspective," Marcus replied, his smile sharp as broken glass. Though some might argue that Atticus was naive about the complexities of his community's social structure. The verbal sparring continued for several minutes, with Marcus trying to bait Aaliyah into an emotional response while she maintained her composure. Mrs. Patterson eventually steered the discussion back to safer literary ground, but the damage was done. Other students had witnessed the exchange, and word would spread quickly through Jefferson's gossip network. During lunch, Aaliyah noticed the first signs of systematic isolation. The usual friendly nods from classmates became hesitant glances. Conversations quieted when she approached groups of students. Emma Sullivan still sat with her, but even Emma seemed nervous, constantly checking to see who might be watching them. "People are talking," Emma whispered over her sandwich. "There are rumors about you challenging Marcus in English class, making it about race when it wasn't. That's not what happened. I know that, but truth doesn't matter when the Reed family decides they don't like someone. Marcus's dad donates huge amounts to the school district. His uncle is on the town council. They have influence." Aaliyah picked at her salad, appetite fading as she processed this information. "What kind of influence?" Emma glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Last year, a junior named Carlos Martinez challenged Ryan Mitchell for student council president. Carlos was actually winning until rumors started spreading about his family's immigration status. Suddenly, his teachers were finding problems with his previously excellent grades. His college recommendation letters got delayed. His parents' business lost several major contracts. What happened to him? His family moved to Hartford after Christmas break. Carlos never finished his senior year here. The message was clear. Cross the wrong people at Jefferson High, and the consequences extended far beyond school walls. The Reed, Walsh, and Mitchell families had tentacles throughout the community, capable of affecting everything from academic opportunities to family livelihoods. That afternoon, Aaliyah discovered her locker had been vandalized. Someone had scratched "Know your place" into the metal door, the letters deep enough to require professional repair. When she reported it to the main office, Vice Principal Thompson seemed more annoyed than concerned. "Vandalism is unfortunate," he said without looking up from his paperwork. "But these old lockers get damaged frequently. Sometimes students misinterpret normal wear and tear as intentional acts. Normal wear and tear doesn't spell out threatening messages." Thompson finally looked at her, his expression suggesting she was overreacting. "I'll have a maintenance look at it, but Miss Brooks, I'd recommend focusing on your studies rather than searching for problems where none exist." Jefferson High prides itself on maintaining a positive learning environment. Walking home from school, Aaliyah felt eyes on her from the black Range Rover that had been following her route for 3 blocks. When she turned to look directly at the vehicle, it sped up and disappeared around the corner. But not before she caught a glimpse of Connor Walsh behind the wheel. The psychological warfare intensified throughout the week. Aaliyah's carefully parked Honda Civic was repeatedly blocked in by other vehicles, forcing her to ask for help moving cars that belonged to Marcus's friends. Her textbooks went missing from study hall, only to reappear in random locations around the school. Anonymous notes appeared in her locker, suggesting she would be happier somewhere else. The most insidious attack came through social media. Someone created a fake Instagram account using Aaliyah's name and photos stolen from her real profile. The fake account posted inflammatory content designed to make her appear arrogant and divisive. Screenshots of these posts circulated through group chats, poisoning opinions before Aaliyah even knew they existed. Emma showed her some of the messages during the chemistry lab on Thursday. They're saying you called Jefferson students privileged racists and threatened to get your military father involved in school politics. Aaliyah stared at the fabricated posts in disbelief. The language was sophisticated enough to seem plausible, but inflammatory enough to generate outrage. Whoever created the content understood how to manipulate social dynamics with surgical precision. I need to report this to the administration. I already tried, Emma said quietly. My mom called the school yesterday. Vice Principal Thompson said they can't control what students post on personal social media accounts, and since the posts don't explicitly threaten violence, there's nothing they can do. But it's not my account, it's completely fabricated. How do you prove that? The photos are real, even if the captions aren't. And demanding the school investigate might just make you look more confrontational. Friday brought the incident that crossed the line from harassment to assault. Aaliyah was using the 3rd floor bathroom during lunch period, grateful for a few minutes of peace away from the constant surveillance and whispered comments. The bathroom was typically empty during this time, as most students preferred the newer facilities on the 1st floor. She was washing her hands when she heard the door open behind her. In the mirror, she saw Marcus Reed enter, followed by Connor Walsh. Her situational awareness, honed by years of her father's training, immediately went to high alert. This is the girls' bathroom, she said firmly, not turning around. We know, Marcus replied, his voice carrying a coldness she hadn't heard before. We need to have a private conversation. Ryan Mitchell appeared in the doorway, effectively blocking her exit. The 3 boys spread out in the small space, their positioning deliberate and coordinated. Aaliyah recognized the tactical formation. They'd planned this encounter carefully. Whatever you want to discuss can happen in public, she said, finally turning to face them directly. Connor shook his head slowly. This is about your attitude problem. Your inability to understand social cues. Some lessons require privacy. My attitude problem? Acting like you belong here, Marcus said, stepping closer. Challenging us in class, reporting imaginary vandalism. Playing the victim when people don't automatically accept you. I haven't done anything wrong. You exist, Ryan said quietly, his political mask finally slipping completely. You came to our school, disrupted our social order, and refused to know your place when we politely explained it to you. Aaliyah calculated distances and angles, her father's voice echoing in her mind. When cornered, create space and identify your exit route. The bathroom door was behind Ryan, but the window offered no escape from the 3rd floor. She was trapped with 3 larger opponents in a confined space. This conversation is over, she said, moving toward the door. Marcus stepped into her path. No, it's just beginning. You see, we've tried being reasonable. We've given you opportunities to adjust your behavior, but you seem to need a more direct lesson. About what? Connor's smile was predatory. about the natural order of things, about what happens to people who don't respect established hierarchies. They moved simultaneously, Marcus grabbing her left arm while Connor seized her right. Ryan remained by the door, watching for anyone who might interrupt. Aaliyah's training kicked in instantly. She went limp rather than fighting, making herself a dead weight that threw off their momentum. "What are you doing?" she demanded loudly, enough that her voice might carry beyond the bathroom. "Teaching you humility," Marcus grunted, struggling to maintain his grip as she twisted in their grasp. They dragged her toward the nearest toilet stall, their intention becoming horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just intimidation, it was calculated. Humiliation designed to break her spirit and establish their dominance permanently. "Stop!" Aaliyah's voice rose to a shout, hoping someone in the hallway might hear. "Nobody's coming," Ryan said from the doorway. "Lunch period, remember? Everyone's in the cafeteria or outside. Just us and you." Marcus and Connor struggled to force her toward the toilet, but Aaliyah's resistance made their task difficult. Her father had taught her that in a multiple attacker situation, the key was disrupting their coordination and creating confusion. She drove her elbow backward into Connor's ribs, causing him to lose his grip momentarily. In the same motion, she stomped down hard on Marcus's instep, feeling something crack under her heel. His howl of pain echoed off the bathroom tiles. "You little," Marcus started, but Aaliyah was already moving. She spun toward the bathroom door. But Ryan was ready for her. His tackle sent them both crashing into the metal doorframe, stars exploding across her vision as her head impacted the wall. Dazed and temporarily stunned, Aaliyah felt hands grabbing her again. This time, they were rougher, angrier, driven by pain and humiliation rather than calculated intimidation. "Hold her still," Marcus commanded, his voice tight with fury as he limped on his injured foot. They forced her to her knees beside the toilet, Marcus grabbing a handful of her hair while Connor maintained control of her arms. The porcelain was cold against her legs, and she could smell the harsh chemical scent of industrial cleaning supplies. "This is what happens," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "when people like you forget their place." He began pushing her head toward the water, and Aaliyah realized that everything her father had taught her about survival was about to be put to the ultimate test. The next few seconds would determine whether she remained a victim or became something far more dangerous than three privileged boys could imagine. As her face approached the toilet water, Aaliyah made a choice that would change everything. She stopped fighting like a victim and started fighting like a warrior, the cold porcelain. Rim pressed against Aaliyah's forehead as Marcus Reed's grip tightened in her hair. Her father's voice echoed through her mind like a battlefield command. "When outnumbered and cornered, create chaos. Make them fight each other instead of you." In the split second before her face would touch the toilet water, Aaliyah made her move. She drove her right elbow backward with explosive force, catching Connor Walsh in the solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping for air, she twisted her body sideways and swept her leg in a wide arc, catching Marcus behind the knees. His injured foot couldn't support the sudden shift in balance, and he crashed sideways into the metal stall door. The sound of his shoulder hitting steel echoed through the bathroom like a gunshot. Ryan Mitchell, still guarding the door, rushed forward to help his friends. But Aaliyah was already rising to her feet, her movements fluid and precise. Years of training with her Navy SEAL father had prepared her for exactly this moment. Outnumbered, trapped, fighting for survival. Connor was still wheezing when Aaliyah's palm strike caught him under the chin, snapping his head back. He stumbled backward, blood streaming from where he'd bitten his tongue. Marcus tried to stand, but his shoulder hung at an odd angle that suggested dislocation. Ryan reached for Aaliyah, but she sidestepped his clumsy grab and used his momentum against him. A simple hip throw sent him crashing into the sink, his head connecting with the faucet in a way that left him dazed and bleeding. The entire fight lasted less than 20 seconds. 3 larger opponents lay scattered around the bathroom, groaning and trying to process what had just happened. Aaliyah stood in the center of the destruction, breathing hard but otherwise unharmed. "You psycho!" Marcus gasped, cradling his dislocated shoulder. "We were just trying to talk to you." "By shoving my head in a toilet?" Aaliyah's voice was deadly calm. "Next time you want to talk, try using words instead of assault." Connor struggled to his feet, his face pale from pain and shock. "You're going to pay for this. You have no idea what you've just done. I defended myself against 3 attackers. I know exactly what I did." Ryan wiped blood from his forehead, his political instincts already calculating damage control. "Nobody's going to believe your version of events. 3 honor students cornering 1 girl in a bathroom? That's not how Jefferson works." Aaliyah pulled out her phone and showed them the screen. "Good thing I recorded the whole conversation." Amazing what modern phones can pick up, even from inside a pocket. The color drained from all 3 faces. Their threats, their admission of planning the attack, their racist motivations, everything was captured in digital clarity. "Delete that," Marcus demanded, taking a step forward despite his injury. "I don't think so." Aaliyah moved toward the door, keeping all 3 boys in her line of sight. "This is evidence of a hate crime. The FBI tends to take these things seriously." The bathroom door opened, and Emma Sullivan burst in, her face flushed with panic. "Aaliyah!" I heard shouting, and she stopped short, taking in the scene of 3 injured boys and her friend standing calmly near the exit. "What happened here?" Emma whispered. "A learning experience," Aaliyah replied. "These gentlemen discovered that some people fight back." Marcus struggled to his feet, his good arm supporting his injured shoulder. "This isn't over. You think you're tough because you got lucky once." "I think I'm prepared," Aaliyah corrected. "The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next." As they left the bathroom, Emma grabbed Aaliyah's arm. "You need to report this immediately. Go to the administration, call your father, contact the police." "I'm going to do all 3, Aaliyah replied, her voice steady with determination. "But first, I need to make sure this recording is safely backed up in multiple locations." They walked quickly toward the main office, passing students who turned to stare at Aaliyah's disheveled appearance and Emma's obvious agitation. Word was already spreading through the school's gossip network that something significant had happened on the 3rd floor. Vice Principal Townsend's reaction to Aaliyah's report was exactly what she expected: dismissive, bureaucratic, and focused. More on potential liability than student safety. "These are very serious accusations, Miss Brooks," he said, not looking up from the paperwork he was shuffling. "Assault, battery, hate crimes. These aren't charges we make lightly at Jefferson. Hi, I have audio evidence of their threats and the attack." Thompson finally looked at her, his expression suggesting she was causing unnecessary drama. Teenage arguments can escalate quickly. Sometimes what feels threatening in the moment seems less serious upon reflection. "They tried to shove my head in a toilet while making racist comments. How is that less serious upon reflection?" "According to your account," Thompson emphasized. "The other students involved may have a different perspective on what transpired. Then let's listen to the recording together. I'm afraid personal recordings made without consent raise privacy concerns. The school district has strict policies about unauthorized surveillance of students." Aaliyah stared at him in disbelief. "So I can't defend myself, and I can't prove my defense was justified. What I'm suggesting is that you consider whether pursuing this complaint is in your best interests. The Reed, Walsh, and Mitchell families are prominent in our community. Accusations of this nature could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved." The threat was politely worded but unmistakable. Drop the complaint or face retaliation that would extend beyond the school walls. Thompson was offering her the same choice: Carlos Martinez had faced accept injustice silently or watch her family suffer the consequences. "I need to call my father," Aaliyah said firmly. "Of course. Use the phone in the guidance office. But Miss Brooks, I'd encourage you to think carefully about how you present this situation. Sometimes peaceful resolution serves everyone's interests better than public confrontation." An hour later, Master Chief Daniel Brooks strode through Jefferson High's main entrance with the controlled fury of a man who had spent 2 decades dealing with threats to American interests. His uniform was crisp, his bearing unmistakably military, and his expression suggested that several people were about to receive a very unpleasant education. The conversation with Vice Principal Thompson lasted exactly 12 minutes. Aaliyah sat beside her father, watching the administrator's confidence evaporate as Daniel methodically dismantled every excuse and deflection. "Let me clarify the situation," Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority of command. 3 students assaulted my daughter in a bathroom while making racially motivated threats. She defended herself successfully and recorded evidence of their crimes. Your response has been to threaten her with retaliation for reporting the incident. "Mr. Brooks, I think there may be some misunderstanding." "Master Chief Brooks," Daniel corrected coldly, "and there's no misunderstanding. My daughter was the victim of a hate crime, and you're attempting to intimidate her into silence to protect the perpetrators." Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "The families involved are very prominent in our community. Perhaps we could arrange a mediated discussion. The FBI doesn't mediate hate crimes. Neither does the Connecticut State Police. What you're going to do is launch a formal investigation, suspend the 3 students pending criminal charges, and ensure my daughter's safety. What you're not going to do is continue this conversation." "Sir, I don't respond well to threats." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire office. "That wasn't a threat. That was a briefing on what happens next. In 30 minutes, I'm meeting with FBI Agent Martinez from the New Haven field office. In 1 hour, I'm speaking with Detective Riley from the State Police Hate Crimes Unit. Tonight, I'm having dinner with Congressman Bradley, who happens to chair the House Subcommittee on Civil Rights Enforcement." The blood drained from Thompson's face as he realized the scope of what he was facing. This wasn't some powerless military family he could intimidate into silence. Master Chief Brooks had connections that made local influence look like playground politics. "Perhaps I was too hasty in my initial assessment," Thompson said carefully. "We should definitely launch a thorough investigation into this incident." "You should have launched that investigation the moment my daughter walked into this office," Daniel replied. "Instead, you chose to protect the perpetrators and intimidate the victim. That decision is going to have consequences for you personally, and for this school district." As they left the administrative offices, Aaliyah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For weeks, she'd felt isolated and powerless, fighting a system designed to protect her attackers. But watching her father dismantle Thompson's authority with surgical precision reminded her that she wasn't alone in this battle. "What happens now?" she asked as they walked toward the parking lot. "Now we let the professionals handle the legal aspects while you focus on being a 16-year-old student," Daniel replied. "But first, we're going to have a very serious conversation about advanced offensive tactics. More training? Much more training. These boys escalated to physical assault, which means they've crossed a line they can't cross. When the legal system finishes with them, they'll be looking for revenge. We need to make sure you're prepared for whatever comes next." That evening, as news of the bathroom incident spread through Millbrook's social networks, 3 prominent families discovered that their sons' actions had consequences that extended far beyond high school disciplinary measures. The Golden Boys of Jefferson High were about to learn that some battles have outcomes no amount of money or influence can change. Federal agents would arrive Monday morning, And the real investigation would begin. Monday morning arrived at Jefferson High like a hurricane making landfall. FBI Agent Sarah Martinez and Detective Michael Riley from the Connecticut State Police Hate Crimes Unit entered the building at precisely 8:15 a.m., their credentials and serious expressions immediately transforming the atmosphere from typical teenage chaos to something resembling a crime scene. Principal Edwards, Thompson's superior who had been hastily called in over the weekend, met them at the main entrance. Unlike his subordinate, Edwards understood immediately that this situation required full cooperation rather than damage control. Agent Martinez, Detective Riley, thank you for coming so quickly, Edwards said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. We've prepared Conference Room B for your interviews and have all requested documentation ready for review. The federal agents had spent Sunday night reviewing Alia's audio recording, the fake social media accounts, and witness statements Emma Sullivan had helped collect. What they'd discovered was a pattern of systematic harassment that met every legal definition of a racially motivated conspiracy. We'll need to interview the victim first, then the perpetrators separately, Agent Martinez explained, her tone professional but cold. We'll also require access to all school surveillance footage, disciplinary records, and communications between administration and the families involved. Detective Riley added, the state attorney's office has already begun preparing charges. Conspiracy to commit assault, civil rights violations under state hate crime statutes, and potential federal charges under the Matthew Shepard Act. Principal Edwards swallowed hard. The Matthew Shepard Act carried a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. These weren't teenage pranks anymore. They were felonies that would destroy any hope of college or professional careers. In conference Room B, Aaliyah sat beside her father as Agent Martinez set up recording equipment. Her composure impressed the veteran investigator, who had interviewed hundreds of victims over her 15-year career. Before we begin the formal interview, Martinez said, I want you to understand that this is a federal civil rights investigation. Everything you tell us will be thoroughly investigated and potentially used in court proceedings. I understand, Aaliyah replied calmly. I want these boys held accountable for what they did. The interview lasted 2 hours, covering every detail. From her first day at Jefferson through the bathroom assault. Agent Martinez was particularly interested in the systematic nature of the harassment, the involvement of school administration, and the broader pattern of targeting students who challenged the established social hierarchy, the Carlos Martinez case you mentioned, Martinez said, consulting her notes. We've already contacted him in Hartford. His family's experience supports your account of how this system operates. Detective Riley leaned forward. Aaliyah, I need to ask directly, do you feel safe returning to the school? Have there been any additional threats since Friday's incident? My father's been teaching me advanced defensive tactics, she replied. I can handle myself physically. But I'm more concerned about what they might do to my family or our reputation in the community. That's exactly why federal hate crime statutes exist, Agent Martinez explained. These laws were designed to address crimes that target not just individuals, but entire communities. The message these boys were sending extends far beyond you personally. Meanwhile, in separate interview rooms down the hall, Marcus Reed, Connor Walsh, and Ryan Mitchell were discovering that their family's influence meant nothing to federal investigators. Marcus went first, accompanied by his father's expensive attorney, Harrison Phillips. The lawyer had briefed his client extensively over the weekend, but nothing had prepared either of them for the methodical precision of Agent Martinez's questioning. Mr. Reed, let's discuss the Instagram account created using Miss Brooks' name and photos. Martinez began, sliding printed screenshots across the table. Our digital forensics team has traced the account creation to an IP address registered to your family's home. Phillips immediately interjected. Agent Martinez, my client denies any knowledge of social media accounts. The account was created from Marcus's personal laptop at 11:47 p.m. on October 15th. Martinez continued without acknowledging the lawyer. We have keystroke logs, browser history, and metadata from the uploaded photos. Would you like to revise your denial? Marcus's face went pale. He'd thought deleting the account and clearing his browser history would eliminate the evidence. He hadn't realized that federal investigators had tools that could recover digital fingerprints from devices and internet service providers. I want to make a deal, Marcus said suddenly, ignoring his attorney's frantic gestures. I'll tell you everything. If you guarantee reduced charges. Phillips tried to stop his client, but Marcus was already talking. Fear had overridden legal strategy, and he began describing months of planned harassment in detail that made Agent Martinez's job significantly easier. Connor Walsh's interview went differently. His family's attorney, Rebecca Stone, was smarter than Phillips and had coached her client more effectively. Connor sat in stony silence for 45 minutes, refusing to answer questions beyond confirming his name. Mr. Walsh, Detective Riley said patiently, your silence isn't protecting you. We have audio recordings of your voice-making threats, surveillance footage of you following Miss Brooks, and digital evidence of your participation in the social media campaign. Your cooperation now could influence the charges you ultimately face, Stone whispered urgently in Connor's ear, but he shook his head stubbornly. The Walsh family had built their real estate empire through intimidation and legal manipulation. Connor had been raised to believe that money and influence could solve any problem. My client has nothing to say, Stone announced. If you have evidence, present it in court. Otherwise, we're leaving. Actually, you're not leaving, Agent Martinez replied calmly. Mr. Walsh is being arrested on federal hate crime charges. He'll be processed and held pending arraignment. The handcuffs clicking around Connor's wrists were the first indication that this situation was beyond his family's ability to control. Ryan Mitchell's interview was the most revealing. The mayor's son arrived with a public defender, his family unable to afford private counsel after his father's recent campaign debt. Ryan understood political survival better than his friends, and he quickly calculated that cooperation offered his only chance at minimizing damage. I'll testify against Marcus and Connor, he said before Agent Martinez even asked her first question. I have text messages, recorded conversations, everything. I want complete immunity. Immunity isn't guaranteed, Detective Riley replied. But cooperation is certainly noted favorably by prosecutors. Ryan pulled out his phone and began showing investigators months of communications that detailed the conspiracy against Aaliyah. Group chats discussing strategy, voice memos planning specific incidents, even videos of them following her route home from school. Marcus was obsessed with getting rid of her, Ryan explained, his political instincts driving him to distance himself from the leadership role. He said Jefferson needed to maintain its standards, that letting her succeed would encourage other students to challenge the social order. The evidence Ryan provided was devastating. It showed premeditation, coordination, and clear racial motivation. Most damaging was a voice recording Marcus had made after their first encounter with Aaliyah, describing her as another uppity minority who needs to learn her place. By Wednesday, news of the federal investigation had exploded across local and national media. Connecticut Public Radio ran a detailed expose on systemic racism in affluent school districts. The Hartford Courant published a front-page investigation into the broader pattern of harassment at Jefferson High. CNN picked up the story, framing it as part of a national conversation about hate crimes in educational settings. The Reed family was the first to feel the complete impact of their son's actions. Morrison Construction, the company Marcus's father had built over 2 decades, lost 4 major contracts within 48 hours of the CNN report. The Millbrook Country Club, where the family had been members for 15 years, quietly suggested they might be more comfortable elsewhere. Marcus's college acceptance to Yale was formally revoked, along with his athletic scholarship offers from 3 other universities. Robert Reed, Marcus's father, found himself facing not just his son's criminal charges but also potential civil liability. Aaliyah's family had filed a federal lawsuit seeking damages for civil rights violations, emotional distress, and the costs of relocating to ensure her safety. The lawsuit named not just Marcus but his parents, alleging they had failed to properly supervise their son despite clear warning signs of his behavior. The Walsh family's real estate empire began crumbling even faster. Connecticut's Real Estate Commission launched an investigation into the company's practices, particularly their history of discriminatory lending and housing policies. Federal investigators discovered that the Walsh family had been systematically steering minority buyers away from certain neighborhoods for years. What had started as a hate crime investigation was expanding into a broader civil rights enforcement action. Connor's mother, Patricia Walsh, attempted damage control through their political connections, calling in favors from state legislators and municipal officials. But federal hate crime investigations operate beyond local political influence, and her efforts only drew additional scrutiny to the family's business practices. The Mitchell family faced different, but equally devastating consequences. Mayor Jonathan Mitchell found himself under intense pressure to resign as protesters gathered outside City Hall demanding accountability. The Connecticut Democratic Party, recognizing the political liability, quietly withdrew their support for his re-election campaign. Ryan's acceptance to Georgetown University was rescinded, and his internship with Senator Bradley's office was terminated immediately. Thursday brought the most significant development yet. FBI digital forensic specialists had uncovered additional evidence that transformed the scope of the investigation. Hidden in deleted files on Marcus's laptop were communications with other students at Jefferson High, revealing that the harassment of Aaliyah was part of a broader pattern targeting several minority students over the past 3 years. Agent Martinez called an emergency meeting with Aaliyah and her father to brief them on these discoveries. "We've identified at least 6 other students who were subjected to similar campaigns of harassment," she explained. The pattern suggests this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather systematic behavior designed to maintain racial exclusivity. At the school, how far back does this go? Master Chief Brooks asked. Based on digital evidence, at least 3 years. Possibly longer, but electronic communications from before 2020 are harder to recover. Detective Riley added, "We're contacting all the identified victims. Several have already agreed to testify." This case is becoming a comprehensive civil rights investigation that could result in federal oversight of the entire school district. Aaliyah absorbed this information with the same calm composure she'd maintained throughout the ordeal. "What does this mean for the boys who attacked me?" "It means they're facing significantly more serious charges," Agent Martinez replied. "Conspiracy to violate civil rights, multiple counts of harassment, and potentially racketeering charges if we can prove this was an organized pattern of criminal activity." The investigation had revealed something far more sinister than 3 privileged boys bullying a new student. It had uncovered a systematic effort to maintain racial segregation through intimidation, harassment, and violence. The boys who had tried to humiliate Aaliyah in a bathroom were now facing the possibility of decades in federal prison. Friday afternoon brought the arrest warrants. Federal marshals arrived at Jefferson High during lunch period, executing warrants for all 3 boys in front of their classmates. The perp walked through the school's main hallway with Marcus, Connor, and Ryan in handcuffs and orange jumpsuits, was captured by student phones and immediately went viral on social media. The images of 3 former Golden Boys being led away by federal agents sent a clear message to every student, parent, and administrator in the district. The old system of privilege and protection was over. Actions would have consequences regardless of family wealth or political connections. That evening, as Aaliyah watched news coverage of the arrests with her father, she felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but the cost had been enormous for multiple families and the entire community. "Do you regret fighting back?" her father asked, recognizing her thoughtful expression. "No," she replied without hesitation. "I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret standing up for myself and for every other student they targeted." Master Chief Brooks smiled with fierce pride. "That's exactly what a warrior should say. You didn't start this fight, but you finished it." Outside their window, news trucks lined the street as reporters prepared for the evening broadcasts that would carry this story to a national audience. The three boys who had thought they could intimidate one girl into silence had instead exposed a system of institutional racism that would now face federal scrutiny. The real consequences for Marcus Reed, Connor Walsh, and Ryan Mitchell were just beginning. 6 months after the bathroom assault that changed everything, Aaliyah Brooks stood in the federal courthouse in New Haven, watching 3 former classmates learn the true meaning of consequences. The mahogany-paneled courtroom was packed with media, civil rights advocates, and families whose lives had been forever altered by one moment of hatred and violence. Judge Patricia Coleman, a no-nonsense federal magistrate with 25 years, on the bench, reviewed the sentencing documents with the gravity befitting a case that had drawn national attention. The evidence presented over the past weeks had been overwhelming: digital forensics, audio recordings, witness testimony, and a paper trail of systematic harassment that stretched back years. "Marcus Reed, please stand," Judge Coleman commanded. Marcus rose slowly, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the designer clothes he'd once worn with such arrogance. 6 months in federal detention had changed him physically. He was thinner, paler, and carried himself with none of the swagger that had once intimidated younger students. His parents sat in the gallery behind him, their faces etched with the kind of defeat that comes from watching your child's future evaporate in real time. "You have been found guilty of conspiracy to violate civil rights, assault motivated by racial bias, cyberstalking, and intimidation of a federal witness," Judge Coleman continued, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The evidence shows you were the primary architect of a campaign of harassment that targeted multiple students based on their race." Marcus's attorney, Harrison Phillips, had tried desperately to negotiate a plea deal, but the government's case was too strong, and the evidence too damning. The audio recording of Marcus planning the bathroom assault while using racial slurs had been played in court, shocking even seasoned prosecutors with its casual brutality. "The court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised probation with mandatory community service in civil rights organizations," Judge Coleman announced. "You are also permanently banned from the Jefferson High School District and prohibited from contacting any of the victims identified in this case." Marcus's mother sobbed audibly in the gallery. 8 years meant he would be 24 when released, his college dreams dead, his family's construction business bankrupt from legal fees and lost contracts. The Golden Boy quarterback had become a cautionary tale about the price of hatred. "Connor Walsh, please stand." Connor's transformation was even more dramatic than Marcus's. The arrogant real estate heir had been in 3 fights during his detention, leaving him with a broken nose that hadn't healed properly and a scar across his left cheek. His family's legal troubles had multiplied exponentially as federal investigators uncovered decades of discriminatory business practices. "Mr. Walsh, your refusal to cooperate with this investigation and your continued defiance in detention demonstrate a lack of remorse that troubles this court," Judge Coleman said sternly. "Your participation in this conspiracy was knowing and willful, and your family's history of discriminatory practices suggests this behavior was learned rather than aberrant." The Walsh family real estate empire was collapsing in real time. The FBI's civil rights investigation had revealed systematic redlining, discriminatory lending practices, and a pattern of steering minority buyers away from certain neighborhoods. Federal prosecutors had filed separate criminal charges against Connor's father, threatening to destroy what remained of the family fortune. 7 years federal prison, 3 years supervised probation, and permanent banishment from all Millbrook public facilities, Judge Coleman pronounced. Additionally, you will forfeit all proceeds from your family's discriminatory business practices, as determined by ongoing federal asset forfeiture proceedings. Connor's face remained impassive, but his hands shook slightly as the reality hit. 7 years would destroy any hope of rebuilding his family's business or reputation. The Walsh name, once synonymous with success in Connecticut real estate, would forever be associated with racism and federal prosecution. Ryan Mitchell, please stand. Ryan's cooperation with federal investigators had earned him the lightest sentence. But it hadn't saved his family's political dynasty. Mayor Jonathan Mitchell had resigned in disgrace 3 months earlier, facing his own federal charges for using city resources to cover up his son's behavior. The Mitchell family's political connections, built over 2 generations, had evaporated overnight. Mr. Mitchell, your cooperation with this investigation has been noted favorably by this court, Judge Coleman acknowledged. However, your participation in a conspiracy that terrorized multiple students cannot be overlooked, regardless of your eventual decision to testify truthfully. Ryan had provided the most damaging testimony against his former friends, describing in detail how they had planned and executed their campaign against Aaliyah. His insider's perspective on their motivations and methods had been crucial in securing convictions on the most serious charges: 4 years federal prison, 2 years supervised probation, and 2,000 hours of community service with organizations serving minority communities, the judge announced. Your political career is over before it begins, Mr. Mitchell. I hope you use this experience to understand the true meaning of public service. Ryan's nod was barely perceptible. At 19, he would be 23 when released young enough to rebuild his life, but forever marked as a federal felon. His dreams of following his father into politics were as dead as his Georgetown University acceptance dot as the 3 young men were led away in shackles. Aaliyah felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but the human cost had been enormous. 3 families destroyed, a community divided, and dozens of other victims finally vindicated after years of silence. Agent Martinez approached Aaliyah and her father as they prepared to leave the courthouse. The conviction sends a clear message, she said quietly. Hate crimes will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law, regardless of the perpetrator's backgrounds or connections. What happens now? Aaliyah asked. The civil lawsuit moves forward, Martinez replied. The families of all victims are seeking damages for civil rights violations. Given today's convictions, those cases should resolve favorably. Master Chief. Brooks shook the agent's hand firmly. Thank you for treating this with the seriousness it deserved. Too many cases like this get buried by local politics. Not on my watch, Martinez replied with conviction. Federal civil rights laws exist for exactly these situations. Outside the courthouse, Aaliyah faced a wall of cameras and reporters. The case had become a national symbol of fighting back against institutionalized racism, and her story had inspired other victims to come forward in communities across the country. Aaliyah, how do you feel about today's sentences? Called a reporter from CNN. I feel like justice was served, she replied calmly, her confidence evident despite the media chaos. These boys learned that actions have consequences no matter who your family is or how much money you have. What message do you have for other students facing similar harassment? Aaliyah paused, thinking about Carlos Martinez and the 6 other victims who had suffered in silence before her arrival at Jefferson High. Document everything, tell trusted adults, and never accept that hatred is normal. You have the right to. Learn in a safe environment, and there are people who will fight for that right. Will you be returning to Jefferson High? Actually, I'll be starting at Stanford University in the fall, Aaliyah announced, bringing surprised murmurs from the crowd. I received a full academic scholarship and early admission to their engineering program. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The girl these boys had tried to drive from their school was heading to one of the nation's most prestigious universities, while they faced years in federal prison. 1 year later, Aaliyah stood before a packed auditorium at Stanford University, delivering the opening address for the school's annual Civil Rights Symposium. Her story had become a case study in federal hate crime prosecution, taught in law schools and criminal justice programs across the country. When I walked into Jefferson High School 18 months ago, I thought my biggest challenge would be making friends and maintaining my grades. She began, her voice carrying easily through the silent auditorium. I never imagined I would become the focal point of a federal civil rights investigation. The audience included law students, civil rights advocates, and other hate crime survivors who had found inspiration in her story. Her poise and articulation impressed everyone present, but those who knew her story understood that this confidence had been forged in the crucible of systematic harassment and violence. The boys who attacked me thought they were defending their school's traditions, Aaliyah continued. What they were actually defending was a system of exclusion and intimidation that had operated in the shadows for years. By forcing their hatred into the light, they inadvertently destroyed the very system they were trying to protect. The Jefferson High School District had indeed undergone complete transformation. Federal oversight had resulted in new policies, mandatory diversity training, and a zero-tolerance approach to harassment. Principal Edwards had resigned, Vice Principal Thompson had been terminated, and the entire administrative structure had been rebuilt from the ground up. I learned that individual courage can catalyze systemic change, Aaliyah said, nearing the end of her address. One person willing to stand up to injustice can expose institutional failures that affect entire communities. After the symposium, Master Chief Brooks found his daughter signing copies of her memoir, Fighting Back, A Daughter's Journey Through Hate to Justice, which had become a bestseller and raised over $500,000 for civil rights organizations. "I'm proud of you, warrior," he said quietly, using the nickname that had carried her through the darkest moments of her ordeal. "I had a good teacher," she replied, embracing her father. "You taught me that sometimes you have to create your own justice when systems fail." "And what did you learn from all this?" Aaliyah considered the question, thinking about Marcus Reed serving his sentence in federal prison, Connor Walsh working in the prison library, and Ryan Mitchell participating in anger management programs. She thought about the other victims who had found their voices, the policy changes at Jefferson High, and the national conversation about institutional racism that her case had helped inspire. "I learned that bullies only have the power you give them," she said finally. "When you stand up and fight back, really fight back, they lose that power forever." 3,000 miles away, in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania, Marcus Reed sat in his cell reading news coverage Aaliyah's Stanford speech. The girl he had tried to humiliate in a high school bathroom was now addressing future lawyers and civil rights leaders at one of America's most prestigious universities. His appeals had been exhausted, his family's business had collapsed, and he faced 5 more years of incarceration. The consequences of that Friday afternoon bathroom assault would follow him for the rest of his life. Connor Walsh, housed in a different facility, had found religion and was participating in racial reconciliation programs. His letters of apology to Aaliyah and other victims showed genuine remorse, though he understood that forgiveness would take much longer than his sentence. Ryan Mitchell, in minimum security due to his cooperation, was earning his GED and planning to work with civil rights organizations upon his release. His political career was over, but he hoped to rebuild his life through service to the communities his actions had harmed. as Aaliyah Brooks prepared for her sophomore year at Stanford, majoring in engineering with a minor in civil rights law. She carried with her the knowledge that one moment of courage had changed, not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. The three boys who had thought they could intimidate her into silence had instead created a voice that would speak for justice for years to come. Their attempt to maintain a system of exclusion had resulted in its complete destruction. The ripple effects of the Jefferson High case extended far beyond Connecticut's borders. Within 6 months of the sentencing, the Department of Education launched similar investigations in 12 other school districts where patterns of racial harassment had been reported. Aaliyah's courage in fighting back had created a template for federal intervention that civil rights attorneys were using nationwide. Dr. Angela Foster, the nationally recognized expert hired to oversee Jefferson High's transformation, published a comprehensive study on institutional racism in affluent school districts. Her research, which included extensive interviews with Aaliyah and other victims, became required reading in education policy programs across the country. The Jefferson case represents a perfect storm of privilege, entitlement, and institutional complicity, Dr. Foster explained during a conference at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. What made this difference was having a victim who refused to be silenced and had the resources to fight back effectively. The Brooks family had indeed possessed advantages that many victims lacked. Master Chief Daniel Brooks's military connections, their middle-class stability, and Aaliyah's academic excellence had provided them with credibility and access that other families might not have enjoyed. Aaliyah understood this privilege and felt responsible for using her platform to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. During her junior year at Stanford, she founded the Brooks Civil Rights Foundation, which provided legal support and advocacy training for students facing harassment in schools nationwide. The foundation's first case involved Maria Santos, a Latina student in Texas whose experience mirrored Aaliyah's own ordeal. When I saw Maria's story on the news, Aaliyah explained to a documentary crew filming her foundation's work, it was like watching my own nightmare happen to someone else. But this time, we had the tools and knowledge to intervene before it reached the point of physical violence. The Santos case resulted in another federal investigation and conviction, establishing precedent that strengthened civil rights enforcement in educational settings. Maria went on to attend Yale Law School with a full scholarship, continuing the cycle of victims becoming advocates. Back in Millbrook, the transformation of Jefferson High had become a model for other districts facing similar federal scrutiny. The school's new principal, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, had implemented innovative programs that turned the institution from a symbol of exclusion into a beacon of inclusive excellence. We had to completely rebuild our culture, Dr. Rodriguez explained during a 60 Minutes interview 3 years after Aaliyah's graduation. The old system of informal hierarchies and tacit discrimination had to be replaced with explicit policies and genuine accountability. The school's test scores had actually improved under the new system, contradicting critics who claimed that diversity initiatives would lower academic standards. College acceptance rates reached record highs, and the school began attracting students from across the region who wanted to be part of its transformation story. Emma Sullivan, Aaliyah's loyal friend who had witnessed much of the harassment, became student body president during her senior year. Her platform focused on maintaining the reforms and ensuring that Jefferson's dark history was never forgotten or repeated. Aaliyah showed us that one person standing up can change everything, Emma said during her graduation speech. But it's our responsibility to make sure that courage wasn't wasted. We have to be the generation that ensures this never happens again. The legal consequences for the 3 families extended far beyond the criminal convictions. The civil lawsuit, filed by Aaliyah and other victims, resulted in a $12 million settlement that funded scholarships for minority students and civil rights education programs. The money came from the seized assets of the Walsh real estate empire and insurance settlements from the Reed and Mitchell families. Marcus Reed's father, Robert, had lost everything in the aftermath of his son's crimes. Morrison Construction, once a pillar of Millbrook's economy, declared bankruptcy 18 months after the arrest. The family home was foreclosed upon, and Robert Reed found himself working as a foreman for a company that had once been his competitor. "I raised a monster," Robert admitted during a rare interview with a local newspaper. "I taught him that success meant dominating others, that our family status made us better than people who looked different or came from different backgrounds. I created the attitude that led to this destruction." Robert's candid acknowledgement of his role in shaping his son's racist worldview was unusual among the families involved. Most had hired public relations firms to manage their image and minimize their culpability. Robert's honesty, while painful, had earned him some measure of community respect as he struggled to rebuild his life. The Walsh family had taken a different approach, fleeing Connecticut entirely after Connor's conviction. Patricia Walsh had liquidated their remaining assets and moved to Florida, where she attempted to restart their real estate business under a different name. However, federal monitoring of their activities and media coverage of their past made legitimate business nearly impossible. Connor's letters from prison, which Aaliyah chose to read despite her therapist's advice, showed a young man grappling with the magnitude of his actions. His transformation appeared genuine, involving extensive therapy, education about civil rights history, and participation in restorative justice programs. "I understand now that what we did wasn't just about you," Connor wrote in one letter. "We were defending a system that had hurt countless people before you arrived at Jefferson. I was raised to see that system as normal, even beneficial. Prison has shown me how wrong that thinking was." Aaliyah never responded to these letters, but she kept them as reminders of how hatred could be learned and potentially unlearned. She had begun corresponding with criminal justice reform advocates who worked with hate crime offenders, learning about the complex process of rehabilitation and redemption. Ryan Mitchell's cooperation with federal investigators had indeed earned him the shortest sentence, but his life after prison proved challenging in ways he hadn't anticipated. His release after serving 3.5 years coincided with his father's death from a heart attack, leaving him alone and unemployed in a community that remembered his crimes. The nonprofit organization where Ryan completed his community service, the Greater Hartford Civil Rights Coalition, offered him a full-time position despite his criminal record. His intimate knowledge of how privileged young people developed racist attitudes made him valuable in their educational outreach programs. "Ryan's perspective is unique," explained Dr. Janet Williams, the coalition's director. "He can speak to affluent white students in a way that other educators cannot. His story serves as a powerful warning about the consequences of hatred." Ryan's speaking engagements at private schools throughout New England drew mixed reactions. Some parents objected to having a convicted felon address their children, while others recognized the value of his cautionary tale. His presentations, which included audio recordings of his own racist statements and graphic descriptions of prison life, had a sobering effect on audiences. During one presentation at a prep school in Massachusetts, a student asked Ryan what he would say to Marcus and Connor if he could see them again. "I'd tell them that we destroyed our own lives defending something that was never worth defending," Ryan replied. "We thought we were protecting our school's traditions, but we were actually perpetuating its worst failures. The system we fought for was built on excluding people like Aaliyah, and that system deserved to be destroyed." Marcus Reed's prison experience had been markedly different from his co-conspirators. His refusal to accept responsibility or show remorse had made him a target for other inmates, many of whom were minorities who had seen news coverage of his crimes. He had been placed in protective custody multiple times and had accumulated additional charges for fighting and disruptive behavior. Prison psychologists diagnosed Marcus with narcissistic personality disorder, a condition that made it difficult for him to acknowledge the harm he had caused others. His letters to his parents, intercepted by prison officials, showed no remorse for his actions, but rather anger at being caught and punished. He still believes he was justified, Dr. Sarah Klein, the prison psychologist assigned to his case, explained to a conference on hate crime rehabilitation. Marcus represents the most challenging type of offender, one whose sense of entitlement is so deeply ingrained that incarceration only reinforces his victim mentality. The stark contrast between Connor's apparent rehabilitation and Marcus's continued defiance highlighted the complex nature of addressing hate-motivated crimes. Prison sentences alone, researchers found, were insufficient to guarantee attitude change without intensive therapeutic intervention. As Aaliyah entered her senior year at Stanford, she reflected on how the trauma that had once threatened to derail her life had instead become the foundation for her life's work. Her engineering studies had evolved to focus on technology solutions for civil rights advocacy, including apps that helped students document harassment and connect with legal resources. Her senior thesis project, a machine learning algorithm that could identify patterns of discriminatory behavior in school disciplinary data, had attracted attention from both civil rights organizations and technology companies. Several Silicon Valley firms had already offered her positions that would allow her to continue her advocacy work while pursuing a lucrative career. Technology can be a powerful tool for justice, Aaliyah explained during her presentation to Stanford's computer science faculty, but only if we design it with equity and accountability in mind from the beginning. The algorithm she developed was being tested in school districts across California, helping administrators identify unconscious bias in their disciplinary practices. Early results showed significant disparities in how students of different races were treated for identical infractions, validating civil rights advocates' long-standing concerns about systemic discrimination. Master Chief Daniel Brooks had retired from active duty during Aaliyah's sophomore year, accepting a position as a consultant with the Department of Education's Civil Rights Enforcement Division. His military experience and intimate knowledge of his daughter's case made him valuable in developing protocols for investigating hate crimes in educational settings. The military taught me about systematic approaches to complex problems, Daniel explained during a training session for federal investigators. Hate crime investigations require the same methodical thinking and attention to detail that we used in combat operations. Father and daughter now worked together on some cases, with Daniel handling the investigative aspects while Aaliyah provided victim advocacy and technological support. Their partnership had become a model for how families could transform personal trauma into systemic change. The Jefferson High case had also influenced federal policy in ways that extended beyond education. The Matthew Shepard Act's enforcement had been strengthened by precedents established during the prosecution of Marcus, Connor, and Ryan. The Justice Department now had clearer guidelines for pursuing federal charges in cases involving social media harassment and coordinated intimidation campaigns. Agent Sarah Martinez, who had led the original investigation, was promoted to head the FBI's new Cyber Civil Rights Unit, which focused specifically on online hate crimes and digital harassment. The unit's first major case involved a nationwide network of white supremacists who had been targeting minority students through coordinated social media attacks. The Jefferson case taught us that modern hate crimes often involve sophisticated digital components, Martinez explained during a congressional hearing on civil rights enforcement. Traditional investigative techniques had to be combined with advanced cyber forensics to build effective prosecutions. As graduation approached, Aaliyah received offers from prestigious law schools, technology companies, and civil rights organizations. Her decision to pursue a joint JD-PhD program at Stanford, focusing on civil rights law and computer science, reflected her commitment to using every tool available in the fight for justice. Her commencement speech, delivered to Stanford's class of 2028, was broadcast nationally and viewed by millions of people worldwide. Standing at the podium where she had first addressed the Civil Rights Symposium 4 years earlier, Aaliyah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. When 3 boys tried to humiliate me in a high school bathroom, they thought they were teaching me my place in their world, she began, her voice carrying across the packed stadium. Instead, they taught me that my place is wherever I choose to stand and fight for justice. The audience rose in sustained applause, but Aaliyah's thoughts were focused on the future rather than the past. The Brooks Civil Rights Foundation had grown into a national organization with chapters in 43 states. The technological tools she had developed were being used by students, lawyers, and investigators across the country. The 3 boys who had tried to destroy her had instead catalyzed a movement that was making their crimes impossible to repeat. In federal prisons across the country, Marcus Reed continued serving his sentence with no apparent remorse. Connor Walsh worked toward his eventual release through education and therapy. And Ryan Mitchell's letters from the outside world described a life dedicated to preventing others from following his path. But their individual fates were no longer the most important part of the story. The system they had tried to defend was gone, replaced by something better. The girl they had tried to silence had become a voice that would echo through courtrooms, classrooms, and communities for decades to come, standing at the threshold of her adult life with law school and a career in civil rights advocacy ahead of her. Aaliyah Brooks understood that the 3 boys who had attacked her had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that individual courage could indeed change the world. The toilet they had tried to humiliate her in had become a symbol of transformation. From that moment of degradation had emerged a movement for dignity, justice, and systemic change that would benefit countless others. In the end, the girl they had tried to dunk in a toilet had flushed their futures down the drain and built something far better in its place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.